This is a workshop on expressive and intuitive painting for Camden carers. Expressive and intuitive painting is feeling free from a lot of restraints we normally attribute to painting, i.e. being good at drawing, knowing how to use the materials properly. Painting in this way is very liberating. One doesn't have to have experience, just use a medium to express themselves. In this workshop, I'm going to be showing how to use a few techniques to help you better express yourself. Different techniques are very much like having different words to use if you were writing a poem. They're merely tools for effect. Here are some of the elements of expressive and intuitive painting: flow, freedom, mark making, self-expression, memory, feeling, intuition, liberating. Intuitive painting comes from either memory or what's in the mind, or how one feels the paint going in a certain direction. We look at different techniques. We're using acrylic paints. Acrylic paints are very versatile. You can use them in multiple different ways. You can use it thick, you can use fluid paint, and even collage acrylic paint. It acts as a kind of a glue. You're able to embed things into your paintings. We're using acrylic here, the most versatile of mediums. You can use acrylic on lots of different surfaces. Here are just a few. So we have concrete, fabric, metal, wood. You can also use it on glass, paper and canvas. Here are some elements of creative expression: brush marks, textures, objects, palette knife, printing, torn paper. These are all just the various techniques that you have to hand, because when it comes then to expressing yourself, you have more elements that you can incorporate into your work. Our exercise in the Zoom group, in the workshop, was based on intuitive painting. I showed the group some techniques. The splattering technique, where you're flicking diluted paint onto the surface. I showed using a palette knife with diluted paint, palette knife with undiluted paint. Lifting is where you put an area of paint down, you put a layer of paint, and then you lift up some of the paint with a paper towel. Wet in wet painting is where you use highly diluted paint to lay some colour down, and before it dries, drop in some other colours, and you create this beautiful effect. So I had to play around with paints before the workshop, and in these I've used some of those techniques. I painted flowers from my mind, from my memory here, because the first bit of colour I laid down started to form a flower shape. So I just carried on with it using my intuition. Here I've used the palette knife with diluted paints and the wet in wet technique. Here's another one where I'm incorporating some of those techniques in there. Wet in wet, palette knife with undiluted paint, palette knife with diluted paint and splattering. And again, a variety of techniques to come up with these flowers. It was very liberating to paint like this because I had no source material to look at. I didn't have a picture of flowers. I just used my memory, my intuition, and the flow of the paint to determine where I would go next. This is an alternative, an interesting thing I tried. I took one sheet of the paper we're using, I tore it into irregular strips, and going again with a flowers theme, I stuck the bits of paper onto the surface, which was also paper, with Pritt stick, and then painted wet in wet over to create the effect of flowers. Again, no source material, just memory and intuition. Closer view of it. Our exercise was to use our intuition, to paint freely using no source material and relying on your memory and intuition only. and participants were encouraged to try different techniques